Before I tell you how the police chief's son assaulted a decorated veteran, let me take you inside the moment he walked into my courtroom. I've seen arrogance before. I've seen entitlement. But what happened that morning tested everything I believe about justice, accountability, and the power of the law. And it all began with a single look. A look that told me this young man thought consequences were for other people. I've presided over thousands of cases in my lifetime, and I can tell you with certainty that a courtroom has a way of revealing a person's character the moment they walk through the door. Some enter humbly. Some enter with fear. And some enter as if the entire system owes them an apology for daring to hold them accountable. That morning, I remember the sound first, the heavy, confident thud of boots hitting the polished floor. People in the gallery turned even before I raised my eyes. And then I saw him. Evan Rourke, 26 years old, son of Police Chief Daniel Rourke, marching into my courtroom like a soldier returning to claim conquered territory. He didn't look like a defendant, he looked like a man who believed the law was something that applied to other people. Sleek black jacket, expensive watch, perfect haircut, and a stare that carried not fear but irritation. Irritation that he even had to be here. His father, the chief, wasn't present, but his presence lingered in the air like smoke. Everyone in the court knew the Rourkes. They were a law enforcement dynasty in our city. And Evan had grown up with people saluting him before he even learned to tie his shoes. He didn't sit, he dropped into the chair as if gravity existed only for people beneath him. His attorney, polished, expensive, and tense, leaned over and whispered, "Evan, please. Show some respect." Evan scoffed. Loudly. Intentionally. "I'm not here to act," he muttered. "This is ridiculous." I adjusted my glasses and looked down at the docket. The charge was clear, serious, and painful to read. Assault on a military veteran, a man who had served his country, a man who walked into danger so the rest of us didn't have to. And according to the report, Evan had attacked him in a parking lot after a minor traffic dispute, punched him twice, shoved him against his own vehicle, and threatened to teach him a lesson about respect. Respect. The irony wasn't lost on me. When I stated the charge aloud, Evan didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the victim sitting quietly on the far side of the courtroom. An older man with silver hair, stiff posture, and a small tremor in his right hand. His name was Sergeant Alan Brooks, U.S. Army, retired. He wore his service jacket, neatly pressed. Not as a show but as a shield. Evan's lawyer rose. "Your Honor, let me begin by saying..." Evan cut him off. "No, let me begin. This whole thing is blown out of proportion. The guy started yelling at me, and honestly, you should be thanking my father I didn't press charges." A murmur rippled through the gallery. I leaned forward, letting silence settle like dust. "Mr. Rourke," I said calmly, "you are in my courtroom. You will speak when asked, and you will show the respect owed to this institution. Am I clear?" He smirked. "I'll try, Judge. But I can't promise anything." And that was the moment, right then, in the first 5 minutes, that I realized this case was unlike most others. I saw it in his eyes, the absolute certainty that nothing bad could happen to him because nothing bad ever had. I folded my hands. "Very well. Since you seem eager to speak, we'll proceed. But I warn you, Mr. Rourke, entitlement is not a defense in this courtroom." He shrugged. "Good thing I don't need a defense." I took a slow, steady breath. That's when I realized this was going to be one of the most dangerous cases I'd ever handled. In my years on the bench, I've learned that every case, no matter how it looks on paper, has a heartbeat. A living truth beneath the legal language. And if you listen closely enough, the real story will eventually rise to the surface. The case of Evan Rourke began long before he stepped into my courtroom with that practiced swagger. It began on a humid Friday evening in a grocery store parking lot on the west side of the city, where two lives crossed at the wrong moment. One shaped by service, the other by privilege. Sergeant Alan Brooks had gone to the store for one thing, his wife's medication. He parked carefully, as older veterans often do, aware of the space, the angles, the room needed to swing stiff legs from a vehicle. As he walked toward the entrance, he heard an engine rev loudly behind him. A black luxury sedan whipped into the spot beside his truck, breaking inches from his side mirror. Brooks turned, startled but calm. "Careful there," he said, raising a hand. Most people would have shrugged it off. Evan Rourke was not most people. According to the witness statements I later read, Evan slammed his door, stormed toward Brooks, and got in his face. A bystander said it looked like a wolf towering over an aging shepherd. "What did you say to me?" Evan snapped. "Just asked you to slow down," Brooks replied, steady and polite. Evan shoved him, hard. Brooks stumbled against his truck but kept his footing. The witnesses said he didn't raise his hands, didn't shout, didn't fight back. Instead, he said quietly, "Son, I don't want trouble." That only made Evan angrier. One punch. Then another. A knee driven into Brooks' side as he fell. It was the kind of violence that reveals a man's upbringing, not his strength but his weakness. Two young shoppers rushed over and pulled Evan away. He yelled at them too, shouting that they didn't understand who he was, threatening to call the chief and shut this whole place down. When officers arrived, Evan immediately switched tones, arrogance replaced by entitlement. "I'm Rourke's son," he said as though reciting a password to a private club. "This guy came at me. You can ask my attorney. Just write it up as mutual combat and let me go." But one officer didn't budge. Officer Ramirez, a calm and steady patrolman with 8 years on the force. He saw the bruises forming on Brooks' jaw, the torn sleeve, the tremor in his hand, and he made a decision that would define the entire case. He arrested the chief's son. Ramirez later told me, "Judge, if the law only works on people without connections, then it's not law, it's decor." His report was detailed, methodical, and brave. It challenged the quiet expectation that the Rourke family should be handled delicately. Brooks, meanwhile, insisted he didn't want to make trouble. Typical of veterans his age. He apologized for taking up resources. He even thanked the officers for dealing with all this. When Brooks filed his statement, one line stayed with me: "I've taken hits before. But this one hurt differently. Because this time, the attack didn't come from an enemy on foreign soil, that it came from a man born and raised under the very freedoms Brooks had spent decades protecting." As I prepared for the hearing, it struck me that this case wasn't simply about an assault, that it was about two visions of America colliding in a single parking lot. One defined by service and one defined by power. And by the time the courtroom filled for Evan's arraignment, the stakes were far higher than a simple guilty or not guilty. This was about trust. Trust in justice, trust in institutions, trust in the idea that no man, no matter his father's title, stood above accountability. When I returned to the bench after a brief recess, the energy in the courtroom had shifted. Word had spread through the hallways, somehow it always does, that the defendant was the police chief's son. A few spectators had slipped inside, hoping to witness a piece of local history. Others simply wanted to see whether the rumors were true. Would the law bend for the powerful today, or would it hold? Evan sat at the defense table, leaning back in his chair as though it were a lounge sofa. One leg draped over the other, fingers tapping rhythmically against his designer watch, eyes drifting lazily across the room as if he were bored at a restaurant waiting for his appetizer. His attorney, Mr. Hollis, stood beside him looking like a man trapped between a client's arrogance and a judge's patience. When I entered, the room rose, everyone except Evan. He didn't move. Not an inch. His eyes remained fixed on his phone, thumb scrolling casually as though he were reviewing a menu. "Mr. Rourke," I said evenly, "in this courtroom when the judge enters, you stand." He didn't look up. "I'm good," he muttered. There was a moment, a suspended breath shared by everyone present. Even his attorney froze. "Evan," Hollis whispered sharply, "stand up. Now." Evan sighed dramatically, stood with visible reluctance, and then plopped back into his seat the moment I settled into mine. Some defendants arrive afraid. Some arrive remorseful. Evan arrived certain that nothing here could touch him. I began the hearing. "Mr. Rourke, you are charged with assaulting Sergeant Alan Brooks, a retired United States Army veteran. How do you plead?" Evan didn't give his attorney a chance to speak. "Not guilty," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "This whole thing is ridiculous. The guy got in my face. I defended myself. End of story." His tone was smooth but dripping with condescension. The gallery stirred. I nodded toward his attorney. "Mr. Hollis, have you advised your client regarding the seriousness of these charges?" Hollis swallowed. "Yes, Your Honor. I've explained everything in detail." Evan snorted. "Explain what?" "That this is going to disappear as soon as Dad makes a phone call." Silence. A dangerous silence. I leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Rourke, let me make something abundantly clear. Your father is not on trial today. You are. And whatever influence he may or may not have outside these walls has no bearing inside this courtroom." He smirked. "If you say so, Judge." His dismissiveness wasn't simple arrogance, it was performance. He wanted the room to know he felt untouchable. Sergeant Brooks sat quietly in the gallery, hands folded. He hadn't spoken a word yet, but his presence was powerful. Every so often, he'd glance at Evan, not with anger, but with the kind of measured disappointment only a veteran can carry. It was the look of a man who had seen true danger and knew this wasn't it, but the principle mattered. I turned back to Evan. We're going to review the evidence in open court. Given your eagerness to speak for yourself, I want to ensure you witnessed the full weight of the accusations against you. Evan shrugged. Fine. It won't change anything. His attorney rubbed the bridge of his nose. From the bench I could feel the tension tightening like a rope. Every courtroom has one moment where the tone is set, where the battle lines become clear. And today that moment had arrived early. I tapped my gavel once. Mr. Hollis, please prepare your client. We will proceed with dashcam footage, witness statements, and Sergeant Brooks' testimony. Evan smirked again, stretching his arms behind his head. Great, he said. Let's get this over with. He had no idea how deeply the evidence would cut. And he certainly didn't know that by the end of the next hour, his arrogance would collide with reality in a way he could no longer ignore. The courtroom lights always seem a little harsher when evidence is about to be shown. Perhaps it's because truth, when brought into the open, has no place to hide. That morning was no different. I ordered the clerk to dim the overhead slightly and prepare the dashcam footage. Evan lounged in his chair, still wearing that insufferable half-smile, as if the entire proceeding were an inconvenience he planned to ignore into submission. Play the footage, I instructed. The screen flickered. A timestamp appeared. Then the camera from Officer Ramirez's patrol car came into focus. We saw Sergeant Brooks walking toward the pharmacy entrance, moving with the cautious steadiness of an older man managing old injuries. The audio captured the sound of an engine revving sharply. The black sedan swerved into the frame, cutting close, far too close, to Brooks. A few people in the gallery gasped. Brooks turned, lifted a hand politely, and muttered something indistinct. A simple gesture. A human gesture. Then Evan entered the screen like a storm. He slammed his door, stormed forward, and shoved Brooks hard enough that the veteran stumbled sideways. The dashcam caught it all. The aggression, the escalation, the unmistakable sense of dominance. When Brooks tried to defuse the situation, Evan hit him. Once, twice, then drove his knee into the man's side before two bystanders intervened. When the footage stopped, the room fell into a heavy silence. I turned to Evan. That is the incident as captured by a responding officer. Do you dispute anything you've seen? Evan shrugged, leaning back. He provoked me. The video doesn't show what he said, and besides, he barely got hurt. Before I could respond, Officer Ramirez approached the stand. Your Honor, he said, I filed the report because the victim was not the aggressor at any moment. He never raised a hand. He tried to walk away. Mr. Rourke pursued him. Ramirez spoke calmly, professionally, but there was a firmness in his tone that came from knowing the cost of honesty. He worked under the chief. He knew his testimony had consequences. Evan scoffed. Oh please. My father will straighten out that report. You don't have to pretend you saw a crime where there wasn't one. The gallery murmured. His attorney closed his eyes in quiet agony. I lifted a hand to settle the room. Officer Ramirez, thank you. Sergeant Brooks, please step forward. The older man stood slowly. His movements were careful, deliberate, the posture of someone who still lived by discipline. When he reached the stand, he didn't look at Evan. He looked at me. I'm not here for revenge, Your Honor, he said. I just want the truth seen. I served 32 years in the Army. I've been shoved before, hit before. But this felt different. I wasn't attacked because of what I did. I was attacked because he thought I was beneath him. His voice wavered slightly, not with weakness, but with emotion carried over years of service and sacrifice. I didn't raise a hand to him, Brooks continued. I've learned too well what escalation can cost. I just wanted to get my wife her medicine and go home. When he finished, the gallery was utterly still. Evan finally broke his silence with a dismissive laugh. This is absurd. He's overreacting. Everyone's acting like I assaulted some national hero. Ramirez stiffened. Brooks lowered his eyes. And I felt the room shift. The truth had been revealed, not just in the evidence but in Evan's reaction to it. His entitlement wasn't hiding anymore. It was standing in the open, unmasked and unashamed. And that was the moment the courtroom saw the real danger of unchecked power. Every courtroom has a threshold, a moment when the truth presses so heavily on a defendant that all the practiced composure, all the arrogance, all the carefully crafted facades begin to crack. With Evan Rourke, that moment arrived faster than even I anticipated. I had just dismissed Sergeant Brooks from the stand. The veteran stepped down slowly, shoulders tightened not from fear, but from the weight of dignity he was determined to maintain. The gallery watched him return to his seat with something close to reverence. Evan watched him with something closer to annoyance. I cleared my throat. Mr. Rourke, you now have the opportunity to respond to the testimony. But I suggest you speak carefully. Evan leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes locked on me with the kind of smirk I had seen on defendants who believed consequences were for other people. Carefully, he said. Judge, with all due respect, which isn't much, this is a circus. That guy, he jerked a thumb toward Brooks, is milking this because he knows who my father is. He wants a payday or attention or both. His attorney grabbed his sleeve. Evan, stop talking. He yanked his arm free. No. I'm done pretending. This entire thing is beneath me. Whispers rippled through the gallery. I folded my hands. Beneath you. He stood abruptly, pacing with the restless swagger of a man who believed the floor itself would carry him safely no matter where he stepped. You don't get it, he said loudly, gesturing toward the evidence monitor. That video? It doesn't show what really happened. He mouthed off at me. He disrespected me. People like him think they can talk however they want, then hide behind some sob story about service. A woman in the gallery gasped. His attorney paled. Evan, Hollis hissed, sit down. But Evan was far beyond counsel at this point. No, he said, turning back toward the bench. Let's be honest, Judge. Guys like me don't get punished. Not really. You know it. I know it. The whole room knows it. He spread his arms theatrically. My father runs the police department. He knows every judge, every prosecutor, every council member that matters. If you try to make an example out of me, you're just asking for trouble. For yourself, for this court, for everyone. Gasps that a few people exchanged glances. Fear, disbelief, outrage. I kept my voice calm. Are you threatening the court, Mr. Rourke? No, he said casually, just stating facts. The system works a certain way. Always has. He leaned forward on the table, eyes sharp, voice dropping low but carrying through the room. People like me don't answer to people like you. It was the quietest line he spoke all morning, and the most revealing. His attorney closed his briefcase slowly, as though even he realized the trial had just pivoted into a new dimension. Ramirez clenched his jaw. Brooks sat motionless, though the tightening of his fingers told me the words had struck deeper than any punch. I leaned back slightly, letting the silence settle. Because silence is a powerful thing that it exposes, that it condemns, and it forces a man to hear the echo of his own truth. When I finally spoke, my voice was low, steady, and deliberate. Mr. Rourke, thank you. You've just shown the court exactly what this case is truly about. His smirk faltered for the first time. This isn't about a parking lot or a gesture or even a punch, I continued. This is about entitlement, abuse of power, and the belief that authority exists to shield you rather than restrain you. His jaw tightened. I tapped my gavel once, a light crack that snapped the tension. Given the defendant's statements, I said, the court will now proceed to sentencing. Evan blinked, stunned. His control, his certainty, was slipping. And he knew it. There are moments on the bench when the air itself feels charged, as if the walls are waiting for justice to speak. That was the atmosphere as Evan Rourke slowly sank back into his chair, the color draining from his arrogance. The gallery leaned forward. His attorney sat rigid, hands clasped tightly. Even Officer Ramirez seemed to hold his breath. I adjusted my glasses and spoke with a clarity honed from decades of handling men who believe themselves untouchable. Mr. Rourke, I began, your actions in that parking lot were violent, reckless, and entirely unprovoked. But what concerns this court even more is what happened in this room. You have mocked the victim. You have attempted to intimidate an officer. And you have openly suggested that your father's position places you above accountability. He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. No. You've said enough. A hush fell again. Let me tell you something I learned early in my career, I continued. Authority is not ownership. Power is not a shield. And respect, real respect, cannot be demanded. It must be earned through humility, through discipline, and through the understanding that the law applies equally to all, especially those who come from privilege. Evan scoffed under his breath, but the bravado was fading. I turned to the victim. Sergeant Brooks, your restraint, dignity, and courage reflect the finest traits of those who have served this country. You deserved none of what happened, and this court thanks you for your composure. Brooks nodded once, quietly. I faced Evan again. Your sentence will reflect both the seriousness of your conduct and the need for meaningful accountability. His attorney braced himself. Evan stared defiantly, though uncertainty flickered behind his eyes. First, I said, You are sentenced to 1 year of probation, supervised. During that period, any failure to comply with court orders will result in immediate jail time. Evan rolled his eyes. Probation? That's it. I continued. Second, you will pay $7,500 in fines to be paid personally, not through your father, not through any family funds or legal insurance. That made him shift in his chair. Third, you will perform 200 hours of community service, specifically with organizations that assist veterans. You will listen to their stories, understand their sacrifices, and learn what real courage looks like. He shook his head. You're kidding. I ignored the comment. Fourth, I said, your driver's license is suspended for 6 months. Reckless conduct behind the wheel has consequences. His attorney closed his eyes. Evan slammed his palm on the table. This is insane. You can't. I tapped the gavel once. You will not interrupt me again. He froze. Finally, I delivered the part of the sentence he never expected. Fifth, and perhaps most importantly, an official inquiry will be opened regarding whether your father's position influenced prior decisions involving you. This is not a punishment for him, but a safeguard for the public. If the system allowed you to believe you were above consequences, then the system must be examined. A gasp rippled across the courtroom. Evan's face went pale. You're dragging my father into this? No, I said firmly. Your actions did that. I am ensuring transparency. That is what justice requires. His fists clenched, knuckles white. The mask of invulnerability he had worn all morning was slipping faster now. I lowered my voice. You stood in this room and told me that people like you don't answer to people like me. Well, today you will answer to the law. Not to me, not to your father, not to your name. The law. I struck the gavel. Sentence imposed. Evan stared at me, breath shallow, as the reality of consequences, real consequences, finally began to sink in. For the first time that morning he looked small. In the days that followed the sentencing, the case of State versus Evan Rourke spread far beyond the walls of my courtroom. It appeared first in small local columns, at the bottom of the page, printed between neighborhood events and weather notes. But stories about power rarely stay small. Within a week, the headlines grew louder. Police chief's son sentenced in veteran assault case. Reporters gathered outside the courthouse. Some came with genuine questions about accountability. Others came simply because controversy sells. But beneath the noise, something quieter, and far more important, began to happen. People talked. Not about scandal, but about fairness. About whether the law still meant something. About whether ordinary citizens could still trust the system meant to protect them. The inquiry into the police chief's handling of prior complaints moved forward as well. I had no influence over its process, nor did I want any. But I read, as everyone else did, that Internal Affairs began reviewing several past traffic stops and disturbances involving Evan. Incidents quietly dismissed, reports filed and forgotten, warnings issued but never followed. I knew then that the sentence had reached further than the defendant. It had touched the institution behind him. A week later, Sergeant Brooks returned to my courtroom. Not as a victim, but simply to thank the clerk for helping him file paperwork. I invited him inside for a moment. He stood straight, as veterans do, even when age bends their bodies. How are you feeling, Sergeant? I asked. He smiled politely. Sore. But healing. And the outcome? I continued. Did it feel like justice? He paused, taking a breath that trembled slightly, not from fear but memory. Your Honor, he said, I didn't want the young man destroyed. I just wanted to know someone would tell him no. Someone had to. His eyes flicked to the empty defense table. Privilege is a strong wind. If nobody anchors you, you drift. He thanked me again, then nodded once before walking out with quiet dignity. There are people you meet briefly in life who remind you why your work matters. He was one of them. A few days later, a letter arrived at my chambers, handwritten, uneven, and signed only, A Concerned Officer. Read. Judge, thank you. Some of us have been afraid to speak up when things weren't right. What you did showed it's still possible to serve the law without serving names. I placed the letter in my desk drawer. Not as a trophy but as a reminder, justice is never abstract. It lives or dies in the decisions we make, case by case, moment by moment. And what of Evan? Months later, he returned to the courtroom, not for a violation, but to submit proof of completed community service. He looked different. Smaller in presence. Less polished. When he approached the bench, he didn't smirk. He didn't posture. He didn't try to charm. Your Honor, he said quietly, I finished my hours. Working with the Veterans Center. It wasn't what I expected. There was sincerity there. Not absolution, not transformation, but the beginning of understanding. He didn't ask for forgiveness, that he didn't offer excuses, that he simply handed me the documents and walked out, nodding once to the clerk who had watched him enter months earlier with swagger instead of humility. Some lessons arrive softly, some arrive by force, and some arrive only when the world finally tells a young man the one word he has never heard: no. As I wrapped up my notes that evening, I found myself reflecting on the same truth I've carried my entire career. Nobody is above the law, not the wealthy, not the connected, not the children of power. Privilege without humility becomes poison. Power without accountability becomes corruption. I turned off the courtroom lights, letting the room rest in quiet darkness. "I'm Judge Caprio," I said softly to the empty chamber, "and remember this: justice doesn't care about your title, only your actions." And with that, the case was finally closed.